Hi everybody, I'm Alex and this is the Dungeon of Fitz. I have an ongoing Skaven project right now, and because I imagine my Skaven more like Vermintide, like a real Vermintide, like they are crawling through tunnels and stuff like that underneath the ground or underneath the surface. I made my own Skaven Gnawholes, and how I did those I want to show you in this video. For the stones, I decided to cast them with Steva form, something similar to plaster of Paris. Of course, you can use XPS or bark and form or cut something out of those. I'm freestyle mixing it until I get the consistency I'm looking for, but you can of course just follow the directions on the package. I personally have a mold from Woodland Scenics, but there are alternatives from Noch and I'm sure other smaller companies too. It's important to pour it in a thin stream to avoid bubbles similar to resin, and I'm using an old dry brushing rag to lay it down in balance so it doesn't spill over. In total, I have casted the rocks 3 times, to have enough at all events. And for my bases, I'm using lasered shapes. For them I just traced the original Gnawholes and lasered them out of MDF. Alternatives can be old CDs or some thicker cardstock, but be aware of the warping if you're using the latter. Next I lay down the rocks roughly how I imagined them to be in the end. And as you can see, I still have some mold lines there, which I will just break off as soon as I glue them. I'm gluing the rocks down with regular PVA glue, and as you can see, it does not matter if you work clean here or not. All the gaps will be filled later. For the cave that I'm building, I'm using some more PVA in between the separate rocks to give my cave a little bit more rigidity. And as soon as everything has dried thoroughly, we're coming to the next step. Here I'm using modeling compound from Geek Gaming Scenics, and of course you can use paper mache or something homemade. There are plenty of tutorials on YouTube for that. After mixing, I'm starting to model and fill in the transitions. Luckily, this stuff dries quickly, so after 30 to 60 minutes you can start working on it. And as you can see here, I'm filling all the gaps and I'm building a small elevation on the front so it looks more like it is descending. For my cave, I'm obviously filling in the gaps on the top too. The next step is to put on the sand after everything dried again. I'm using a mix of normal and decorative sand and stones, which is luckily quite cheap here. I'm gluing everything down with PVA again, and for this I just brush everything that ought to be dirt and sand with glue. After everything is smeared with PVA, I just pour my sand mixture over it until everything that had PVA on it is covered with sand. And now we do the same for the other Gnawholes. I personally let everything dry for a minute or so before tapping off the surplus sand. Of course, we're collecting all of it as we want to waste as little as possible. After everything dries again thoroughly, we need to prime everything. I'm using a mixture out of PVA, black paint and water, but of course you can use Mod Podge too. In this case, if you haven't used XPS, you could even prime everything with a rattle can. I prefer the mixture with PVA because it hardens the sand further. And after everything is primed, we need to wait again for it to dry. After it has dried, I further take some time to cut off any excess sand, primer and glue from the underneath to prevent damage to my mats. Now with this done, we have our foundation done and can start with the painting. I'm going to mainly dry brush everything and I'm using an old or not often used brush for this. Firstly, I'm dry brushing the stones with a light grey blue to give them a slight blue glimmer, as I think pure grey would look too unnatural. Here you can see it after our first step. The camera makes it shine more than it does in real. After that I'm using Rhinox Hide, so a quite dark brown. With this I'm dry brushing over everything that is going to be my dirt. Now I'm switching to Gnawholes brown, a lighter brown with a hint of grey. Again, just over the earth and dirt. To give my earth a small highlight, I'm slightly dry brushing the dirt with Steel Legion Drab, a light brown. After this is done, we're switching to a light grey, a Longbeard grey to be exactly, and dry brush earth and stone with it. Next we're putting on some washes. I'm using the Vallejo game washes in sepia and black, as I think they work quite good on terrain, are cheaper as any other buyable washes, and as I'm too lazy to mix my own. Here you can see that it's always a good idea to wash your brushes, as the liquid washes might reactivate the dried paints from the dry brushing step before. But that's not as bad as it looks in the first moment. It just gives more variation to the colors and will blend in with everything else in the end. Now with a clean brush I'm washing the earth with my sepia wash and the stones with the black wash and blend in some dots of the other wash, wet and wet, into everything. After using my washes quite generously, I take a paper towel and try to dab away all the bigger pools, so it doesn't look as intense anymore. Before the washes have dried completely, I additionally use a violet and a green wash to give everything a little bit more color. This gives everything more natural variation and, as already said, looks way more intense on camera as in real. At last, after everything dried again, I'm dry brushing all of it again with a light grey to bind it together. After this is done, we finish the painting step. As two of my Gnawholes still need roofs, this will be our next step. For this, I'm using coffee stir sticks that I got in bulk for cheap and round down the edges with my cutter and cut in some irregularities. I did not count the sticks I'll need, but just took a handful. If I cut down too much, that shouldn't be a problem, as there are enough projects to use them on. The same is done with a barbecue skewer to get more edges into it. This will be used as legs for the roofs later. Next, I'm going to glue together some of the stir sticks to form the first roof. You can of course plan ahead and look what fits, but in the end I'm just gluing some together and hope it works out. I'm using Aleene's tacky glue here as it dries faster and I'm impatient. To make it at least a little bit easier, I'm gluing the front bar on before gluing on the others to get some shape in. On the second roof I used way less sticks as I wanted to work with cloth here to cover the roof. And as last step I trimmed the overhanging bars a little bit. After everything dried again, I'm gluing on the skewers as legs with some super glue on both of the roofs. To fasten this a little bit, I'm additionally using some activator spray. And after everything holds together, I trim the legs to size. For one of the roofs I wanted to use cloth, and for this I'm just using the fabric of some old chino pants and cut it down to small patches. To glue the fabric down, I just take some thinned down PVA. I think this should roughly be a 1:5 mixture with 1 part PVA and 5 parts of water. First I lay down the patches on my frame and then I drip down the thinned down PVA. Of course you can use a spray bottle or an old brush, but I have this pipette and I find it easier. Here you can see how that looks. While it's still wet, I'm pushing the cloth where I want it to be and where I want it to sag down. Now, before everything dried completely, I took the sepia wash again and brushed it on the planks and the still wet cloth. Additionally, I took some green wash and dribbled down some of it on the cloth with a pipette. Now, after everything dried, it gets a final dry brush, and for this I'm using the same light grey as before. Finally, I'm gluing the roofs on my Gnawholes with some super glue, and you could use the activator again, but as my super glue crystallizes white, when I'm doing that I didn't use it this time, as it wouldn't look as nice as I wanted to do. After this is done, we're coming to the next step. We're gluing down a countless number of tufts. Sadly, I lost some footage here, but I think you can imagine what I did. I just glued the tufts on the Gnawholes with some PVA. I'm using tufts from Army Painter and Vallejo. Theoretically, you could call the Gnawholes finished now, but I additionally used some pigments from Vallejo as final step. I'm spreading the pigments randomly on dirt, stone and tufts to give everything a little more depth. The pigments are then sealed with a matte varnish spray, but please keep in mind that they lose color by varnishing them. Here you can see them unvarnished and here varnished. So I hope you could get some inspiration out of this video. If there are any open questions, feel free to comment or send me a message through Facebook or an email or whatever. I'll try to answer everything. The products I used are linked in the description. Most of the links are probably affiliate links, so if you order something through those, you don't pay more, but I get a small piece of the cake. If you're really in some money spending mood, you can support me by spending your hard-earned money on dungeonoffitz.de for some of my MDF kits. The page is currently only available in German, but I would love to help you through it or translate the text to English if necessary. Apart from that, I will put some pictures on now and hope you could get something out of this tutorial. See you!